When you sat in the classrooms, if children sat for long periods of time, they can become a little bit lethargic. So get them up and active and moving around, engaged in their learning is really, really important. So we wanted to look at something that was able to make better decisions, really. So what the CAS framework allowed us to do was to be able to audit, identify what we really need to do in school, so identify the priorities, and then it allowed us to look at long-term planning, so thinking how we use that P Sports Premium longer term to get real legacy, real impact from the funding. This is not about adding additional workload, it's about really being efficient in how you audit the school and how you plan to use your resources wisely.
One of the whole school priorities is to develop those oracy skills within children. We think that that goes hand in hand with movement really, because one kind of naturally leads to the other. So it's really important that we have these activities across school so that children can develop their oracy skills through active learning.
So we had to think a little bit outside the box about how we could get children to be more confident. And one of the things we do is we adapt our assemblies, but what they do is they think about a subject area, so for example active learning, and they have to produce a 5-minute presentation that they present to the rest of school. We started off just by putting in the staff room a list of all the subject areas, and one of our classes in school, Leopard class, chose active learning and presented on that, and really the CAS has really snowballed from there in terms of those children sharing with their peers what active learning was like, what it felt like in the classroom, and other classes and children then asking, you know, what was happening in their class and what was a little bit of the action.
I think that for the children, they naturally associate conversation with movement and being active. So if we're asking them to sit still, we're usually asking them to be quiet at the same time because they've got to focus on what it is that they're doing. But if they are moving around and being active, I find that the children naturally want to talk and have those discussions more openly. And I think they feel better when they're doing it as well. They seem to enjoy the activity more and it's more memorable for them.
We've engaged in programmes in the past and they tend to be sort of bolt-on programmes, so we couldn't really see huge impact. And we were clear about active learning at Sunnyfields being about actual session times, so not a separate session, not an active learning session, part of their learning. So getting children up active within the session, active in the subject areas, and then contributing to be able to talk about it was really, really important for us. So developing their oracy meant that the children became more confident. They were used to talking to governors, they were used to talking to other adults, used to sharing their learning with their parents. We've now moved on considerably, so we've moved on from oracy to developing the outdoor provision, the mental health and well-being of our children, and as part of that we work really closely with Doncaster Rovers Foundation to develop that product. We worked with them for many, many years in terms of having coaches on our site, working with our children. We've always been creative in terms of how we use the P Sports Premiums. We've never used it for just paying for coaches, so we use it for CPD. So the coaches come in, they work alongside the staff, team teach sessions, and then they work alongside staff CPD sessions after school just to coach them, develop their teaching and learning. And we've operated like that for quite a few years, working with the foundation. But what we found was we were reaching a point where our staff were experienced, they were knowledgeable, but we wanted to continue that relationship but couldn't use the same products. So we posed a bit of a challenge to the foundation last year, and that was that we really want to look at our children's mental health and well-being needs, so get them active in our environments, out in the woodland areas, active in other session areas, and we wanted to try and pair up the foundation with CAS and try and get the two to work in coordination. And so the way we did that is we challenged Mason, who's one of our coaches. We challenged him and his team to develop a product, to develop a unit of work for our children that we could offer right through from reception through to year 6 that involved them in their curriculum areas but outside in the provision. So he did that, he took that away, he worked on it, developed it and came and delivered it, and we piloted it in our school last year, and every child from reception through to year 6 had a 6-week programme working alongside Doncaster Rovers Foundation. So essentially what we've done in partnership is develop a product that benefits children in our school but potentially could benefit children in the wider Doncaster region and certainly benefit the foundation in terms of the offer that they can put out to customers and colleagues.
Historically, what we've done with Sunnyfields is just support their PE sessions, so football, multi-skills, rounders, anything depending on the season really. But since David Richardson and Mr McConaughey has got involved with the CAS framework and that programme, we've worked with them very closely to support that agenda. So what we're doing, what we have done is sat down, found out the objectives of what it was and how we could support them. It's not just sport, it's not just PE.
As a leader, we are encouraged to try and get in as much active learning as we can. When we then planned together, so how it started was I would take the planning for science and I would start to drop in these active learning so that other people then could use that planning and apply it then in their teaching. And then I've started to sort of move away now, but sort of team teach but through planning, and offered ideas. Oh, you're doing that outside, or you're learning about plants, why don't you actually go outside and look at the plants that we've got outside? And then because that's been so successful now and we've put that into place, you can already see that that's coming through already. So people are planning for active learning without us really having to say anything about that.
We were clear about making sure that Sunnyfields was very clear about what our offer was, and we weren't particularly clear in that prior to working with the Creative Active Schools framework. So we made some minor tweaks after our audit, so within our policies. So for example, ensuring that we've got active learning within the PE policy, and ensuring that staff understand what active learning is. And then every half term we have a staff development meeting that's linked purely to PE and Creative Active Schools. So myself and Jamie jointly lead that. We've tweaked our job specifications and our adverts. So adverts that go out for new colleagues that wish to join the team at Sunnyfields, it's very, very clear that we're an active school and there is an expectation that staff that join this school engage with that active experience working alongside our children, just in the same way that we expect our staff to be empathetic and sympathetic to our children.
Whenever we have our planning meetings, it's a topic of conversation. How can this be active? How can we get the children moving around and engaged in this activity? It's always a priority to us. And I think that the whole school culture is that we shape our learning around what the children would enjoy and what they would remember. We're always thinking about how we can make this a memorable session, because then they're going to remember what we want them to know. It's sort of reshaped the way that I see active learning, and how active learning is actually something that's drip fed into each subject rather than it being a standalone activity. It's something that we can embed throughout the curriculum as much as possible, and the children become more settled when you do that with them. I think that whole school culture that all staff have is really a key part of why active learning is successful here. Today's session was an English session, and it was right at the beginning of the unit, so the children have never been introduced to that story before. It's a new narrative unit, so I wanted to kind of give the children clues as to what the story was about, and I gathered that the children would understand that it was a Three Little Pigs story, but it's an alternate version of that. So I was really trying to get the children to use their sort of investigator skills to be able to pick out the clues in the bits of text that I'd put out and the pictures from the story as to what was going to happen. So it was an active session, as the children really enjoy that. So we had our pictures all around the room, and we had some text from the story as well, and the children were going around the room and picking up clues to add to sheets of paper. I really wanted the children to be moving around the room because it encourages discussion. They're coming across different children as they move around the room, so they're not just talking to the person next to them or the person opposite them. They're being able to interact with anybody in the room, and it really gets them to take ownership of their learning as well.
As soon as you start to make something active, the impact it's right there in front of you. The children are engaged, they're having fun. I've seen more success because they've actually been through applying it in a real life situation. Then they can then come back and then apply it then in the classroom. Last half term we did some science, and it was about like biomes, so it was geography and science, and it was about biomes that we live in. Well, we've got a wood just, you know, on our premises, so we were learning about deciduous forest and how the trees have adapted. So the children went out there and they were looking for the ways that plants had adapted to live in a deciduous forest. So, you know, the children are looking, they're using what we've got on the grounds already. Also, we've started to put things into our maths as well. So I was doing a lesson and it was about quarter turns, half turns, 3/4 turns, that sort of thing. And I was doing it in the classroom and I had like something, you know, like on a piece of paper, a shape, and I was turning it and so on. However, they just weren't getting it. So we went outside onto the playground and then we started marching like you were in the army. And I was shouting out commands like quarter turn, 3/4 turn, to the left, to the right. And we had about 5-10 minutes outside. And that learning then when we came back in was so successful because they'd actually gone and done it themselves and physically moved themselves, and then came back in and then applied it to something then onto paper. So trying to get in as many of those little pockets of active learning as we can.
I think that the resources are the same as what you would have done if you were sat down doing that activity. I would have used the same pictures, the same bit of text. All I did was print off a few more copies so that children weren't fighting for one piece of information. I sort of did multiple copies of the same information so that it was spread out around the room. But it didn't take me any extra time to do that. So yeah, really easy to resource. I think my advice would be to work with your colleagues as much as possible. Sometimes you can't always think of a way that the learning could be more active, and I think gaining another perspective from a colleague is really valuable. And I think if that ethos is throughout your team of staff, I think that's really beneficial for all. I would also say to use the things that you've got available to you to try and make the active learning as easy for you to put out as possible. Because I think that often we can overthink it and think that it has to be this all singing, all dancing, you know, really over the top experience of a lesson. And actually, you know, just by embedding simple movement into your lessons, like getting up and down from your seats and keeping the children active in that way, I think that can really help more than we think it does.